So a very eventful day both inside and outside of the AGM. Many political watchers calling the event unprecedented for many reasons. For more on that, we're joined now by political columnist Graham Thomson, who spent the day in Red Deer. Thanks so much for staying up late to chat with us, Graham.
My pleasure.
So let's start off with just the sheer size of this gathering. You've been doing this a long time, and I know you've mentioned you'd never seen anything like this.
Yeah, 6,100 people were registered. Last year's event was 3,700. That was a record. This is a huge number. They're claiming it's the biggest number of a convention for any political party in the country, not just Alberta. You had a main hall with 3,000 people roughly, an overspill hall, and another overspill hall. It was gigantic. So I think that they were touting this as a big convention, and it certainly was.
So, I mean, the other obviously big surprise here was just the sheer amount of support that Danielle Smith got from members. We're talking more than 91%. What do you make of that?
That was huge. Like 4,600 people actually voted. So 4,600 voted, 91.5%. Nobody was predicting that number that high. So I was talking to people inside our entourage, people who know her well, people in their office. They're thinking 75, 80, maybe the low 80s. 91.5 was something that nobody expected. And when they announced that number, even people in the hall I had talked to who supported her were thinking maybe 65, 70. 91.5, they were ecstatic. They were on their feet cheering because they were surprised as well by the amount of support that she was getting.
So, I mean, it's obviously a huge number, but what are the implications of an approval rating this strong moving forward?
Well, no, it's good for her. The party is saying we're behind you. It also kind of slams the door on the negative Nellies, if they can call them that. Take Back Alberta, for example, socially conservative group that basically ran the convention last year in many ways. They were putting out pamphlets saying that Smith hasn't done enough. They gave her a D rating in terms of almost a failure, basically. But the door was slammed on them because 91.5%. So this is good for her, for the Premier, obviously, but it doesn't end her problems because this is a party that passed all 35 resolutions. And some of them are straightforward, like give us that tax break you promised us last year in the election campaign, fine. But then they're saying we should not pay for any sex reassignment surgeries for adults. So if you want to get a sex reassignment, that's up to you. You pay for it. It's cosmetic surgeries, they called it. Then they were saying things like, let's scrap all talk of emission reductions. Let's actually scrap any idea of a net zero target that the government has right now. So that runs contrary to government policy. But this is a party that tends to look at resolutions not just as a gentle nudge or suggestion, but as a directive to the government to actually take action on these resolutions.
I want to go back to what you said, that they actually passed all of the resolutions. How unusual is that for it to happen?
Yeah, it is unusual. Normally, even last year, they could vote a few down, but they passed them all. And this, again, like some were just basically what we've seen before, and some are much more controversial, and some run against government policy. But it came, for example, to that, let's scrap the net zero plan for 2050. Let's stop talking about CO2 as a pollutant. It's a building block of life, and more CO2, the better for plants. Well, we talked to the government afterwards, and the Minister of Environment, we said to her, are you going to then scrap net zero? And she did not answer the question. You could tell they're not going to scrap their plans for net zero, but she didn't want to say anything at the convention that would run contrary to what the members were telling her. Because the members, they really do hold a lot of power over the government. In fact, this morning, there was an accountability session from the Premier and a couple of ministers up on stage explaining what happened to last year's resolutions. You know, yes, we agreed with this, we did this, we brought this legislation in. I've never seen that before either. Normally, resolutions kind of wither and they kind of blow away and no one thinks about them. These members think about the policy, and when they're giving a directive to the government, they expect to see something happen.
Mm-hmm. Now, as far as those resolutions, I'm curious, in your opinion, do you feel, because as you mentioned, some of them were extremely controversial, do you feel there is now room, because of the strong support that Smith is now seeing, for her to moderate some of these resolutions and these bills before being introduced?
That's a really interesting question. I asked her that question during a scrum with the media news conference, like, would you moderate? And she says that she's willing to look at the policies that she's bringing in legislation and through the debate, and we'll see, maybe they will be. Maybe that didn't use the word moderate, but maybe listen to complaints, listen to critics, and actually maybe change some of these things. The thing is, How far does she want to go to change what she has promised to members and said in the legislature? Maybe they will start moderating things because most of Albertans don't support many of these things they're bringing in, on the Bill of Rights, things like that, giving people the right to refuse to take a vaccination, especially in a hospital, for example. So we'll see if they do start moderating it, but at the same time, the members are watching this government like a hawk.
Would you say, and putting you on the spot, there's maybe still a bit of a divide between members within the party despite this overwhelming approval rate?
Well, I would say no, tonight no, because they slammed the door on Take Back Alberta and those who are pushing the government to be more socially conservative. But also at the same time, the members knew what they wanted. They didn't really need Take Back Alberta to direct them. They knew what they wanted. They passed all these resolutions. They'll be watching the government now to see what they're going to be doing with these resolutions. And a year from now, the next convention, they will be asking, what did you do with these resolutions? If you don't like the answer, it can cause a problem for her.
Hey, it's shaping up to be a very interesting fall session, Graham. Coming out of this AGM, do you have any thoughts about, what we can be expecting to see this fall session?
Well, interesting what's going to happen now. I talked to people in the government. They said a lot of focus right now on the leadership review and on the resolutions. They'll be focused now on bigger issues. The one big issue for them is a potential deficit. The government is saying they may be running a deficit in the new budget. That is going to be the next big thing because they have rules against running a deficit. Unless the price of oil drops dramatically, that gives them an out. So they're saying now the next big thing is the deficit, government spending. They're in contract talks with various unions. So that will be all about money coming in and money going out. That's what we'll be focused on, I think, in the fall and into next spring.
Interesting times ahead for sure.
Absolutely.
Graham, as always, thank you so much for sharing your insight. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.